Welcome back to World War I for Dummies. Today we have with us historian Jamie Summerson to help us wrap up our series on World War I by explaining the last Allied offensive, the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. Thanks for being here today, Ms. Summerson.
No problem. I'm so glad to be here. Well, the first thing to keep in mind is it was the final offensive that was done by the Allied forces during World War I. It literally ran from September 26, 1918 until the armistice was enforced in November 11th of that same year.
So this is what really ended the war, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was known that the war depended on how this played out. Either the Germans could get pushed back into Germany if the Allies won the offensive, or they would get pushed even further into France and the Germans would claim that territory.
Okay, with that out of the way, why don't you tell us what happened?
Sure.
What happened?
Sure, I would love to. So there was the leader of the American Expeditionary Forces, General John J. Pershing. Now this guy obviously didn't like sharing, because when the Americans came into World War I, the Allies wanted the American Army to join under the Allied command. But Pershing was having none of that. He declared that the Americans would fight as a separate army in conjunction with the Allied forces. This is what really prompted the Argonne Offensive, also known as the Meuse-Argonne Offensive or the Battle of the Argonne Forest. It allowed the American army to act as a separate army while advancing the major objectives of the Allies. So Pershing leads the American-dominated offensive against German troops along the Western Front, and it's from the Meuse River to the Argonne Forest, which is roughly a 24-mile stretch of land. While there were some French troops, there was and a lot of French equipment, at least 189 tanks and 840 aircraft. The troops involved were primarily American, with 9 full divisions or 3 corps being engaged. Now, apparently Pershing wasn't listening to anyone when he made his tactics, because his plan was, when all is said and done, to try and rush across no man's land, forcing an engagement with the German troops and pushing them back out of their trenches. Something that's pretty stupid in trench warfare, if I have to say so myself. But this was especially bad considering just how green the American troops were. The last time America fought a proper war was back in 1860 during the American Civil War. Of course, there were minor skirmishes like the Seminole War, the various engagements in South America, but really the last major traditional style war with 2 large armies facing off against each other was the Civil War, which was 52 years ago. The majority, if not all of the army that had fought then, was retired by now, so we're talking pretty green. But Pershing felt that because of American military superiority in numbers, in artillery, all that kind of stuff, that Americans could still break through. What ended up happening was the Americans had mustard gas and phosphine shells dropped onto the German lines, and they shelled them with that for a few hours. This obviously produced heavy casualties, with at least 216 casualties during the barrage on the German side. After that, the American infantry began to push across German-held territory, and they're trying to break through the enemy line. They went across no man's land, if you would believe it. And they were supported by heavy tank batteries and aerial fire, but it still didn't make it all that easy. They came up against German artillery and German machine guns, which was just mowing them down. People were dying everywhere. But the Americans still managed to push through, and they managed to push the Germans back. They actually managed to make, on the second day, make it to Meuse-Argonne before being bogged down with disorganization and lack of supplies. This happens a lot. There's an advancement of the armies, then troop movement would stall as the auxiliary troops would struggle to reestablish chains of supply and stuff like that. So basically both armies went hopscotching across the battlefield. The American forces would advance forward a few miles and the German troops falling back further into their defenses, then everyone pausing as each worked on reestablishing their supply line. So this kept happening until the Allied forces, both American and French, managed to capture the city of Sedan. By that time, while they were preparing further movements, the armistice went into effect and the war was officially over. And so that was really the Argonne Offensive, and that's about it.
Well, thank you so much for watching, and join us next time when we talk about World War II for Dummies.
See you next year! We're not doing it next time!
Are you ready? Ooh! I know you see me standing there. Oh! Ah! I'm not Pershing if I don't have the jacket on.
Okay, so this is what
Logan! Dad!
So this is
He's coming.
so this is what really ended the war, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Wait, that's not the script.
Yeah, I ad-libbed.
Nerf this. It's really good.
Oh God. You alright?
Yeah, all right.
Same project, Tommy, Ethan.
Hi, Voorhees. Bye, Voorhees.
Perfect for